Hello, and welcome back to Diecast Graveyard. My name is Paul. Thanks for joining me today. We got a really cool build today. We got a bunch of airbrush techniques we're going to display on a VW drag bus. Now this is a 1/18 scale, and I'm doing this for an event that I'm going to up in North Carolina for the grand opening of House of Cars Carolina. And this car is going to be given to the new owners of the store as a gift to display inside the store. Well, here I've taken the drag bus apart, and there's a lot of parts and pieces to this that you have to unscrew and strip it down so you can get it painted. Now, one of the things I do is when I take things apart that have screws in it, I try and put the screws back into it so I don't lose them or try to remember where they go to. So that's one thing you should look at. Now this is going to be a little bit of a longer video because there's a lot of things in this video that I'm going to be demonstrating. So if you happen to skip through here, there's going to be a lot of things that you miss. So you may have to watch this in a couple different time frames because it's probably about 50 minutes long because I'm demonstrating a whole bunch of techniques. Now once you get your vehicle apart, go ahead and make sure that you put the pieces inside a container so you don't lose them. And again, if there's places that have screws, I put the screws back inside the pieces where they came from so I remember where they go and I don't lose them. So that's something to think about. Now, that's a tip from your Uncle Paulie, and I've got too many tips in here to keep displaying the little witch doctor, so let's just go ahead and have some fun. Here I've got the top, I got the windshield taken out. It's held on by these tabs. I'm going to have to sand off that tampo on there so it doesn't show through the primer when I put it on, and get that all sanded off. And then with the drag bus itself, I'm going to put it inside or put it on a container or a tray and cover it with citrus strip. Go ahead and grab your favorite adult beverage and join along as we have a little bit of fun here. I had a question from someone the other day that says, you use citrus strip, how long do you let it set? Well, the thing is with citrus strip is it does take a little bit of time. Now, he says, I've seen some of these other videos where the results are almost instantaneous. And I said, that is true, but that's because they're filmed in time lapse. As you'll see here coming up, the time lapse definitely is a lot of fun to watch. Now make sure that everything that you need to get the paint off of is covered really good with whatever paint stripper you're using. Inside and out, because we're going to be doing a color change here. Let's go ahead and speed this up a little bit. Now let's watch the time lapse. This is really cool. Don't you wish the paint stripper worked that fast for real? That's really neat. Let's move on. Once I got the body stripped and cleaned up, and I did the roof and got that all sanded off, I sprayed it down with some Tamiya surface primer. Here I'm using gray. Now this is just so the paint that you're spraying on has a little bit better adhesion. Next I'm going to be spraying several coats of Createx Autoborn Sealer, this silver sealer, and this is a really good base for any candy colors that you're going to put on. So I sprayed it with the Autoborn Silver Sealer, and this is the result. Now if you have to, you can scuff it up with a Scotch-Brite pad, but make sure it dries thoroughly. You're looking probably about 3 or 4 hours before you start putting any kind of tape on there, and it'll help you from the paint peeling up when you put tape on it. Now one of the things you should do is coat that with some clear to protect the base so it doesn't peel up with the tape. Now I'm going to spray the body down with some Disco Silver from Blake's Flakes, and I mix that up with some clear coat. And I'll tell you, the camera here, the light doesn't do it justice. This stuff actually looks like it's on fire in the sunlight. But that is absolutely beautiful. That's going to come through on the backside when you spray down your candy colors, and it's going to make it look absolutely phenomenal. I'll let that set overnight just to make sure that it's hard enough. Now I'm going to be lining out my car with some pinstripe tape. Make sure you put your center line down first so you've got a really good representation, and balance things out as you tape things off. This is one of the more fun parts of what I do here. And I love doing the painting. I love having the fun. And the best part is I get to share it with you. Now that looks a little bit off, so I'll go ahead and I'll do it again. Now here's where it's important. I said that you have the clear coat. Now this pinstriping tape has a very low adhesion, so it comes off clean. But if you didn't coat it well enough with your clear coat, you're liable to pull off some of that base coat, and it just leaves gaps and holes and peels it up, and you may have to do your paint job again. So make sure you get a really nice, good clear coat finish on there before you start putting any pinstripe tape down, because it will peel up, and I did have that happen in a few places. Fortunately, I was able to cover it up, but just get a really good coating on there. Now here I'm trimming up the tape that I'm putting on. And another thing that you want to think about is when I go to cut this tape, don't cut too deep, because you'll cut into the paint. And if you cut into the paint, when you go to pull that pinstriping up, then you're going to peel up the paint with the tape. So be very careful and just barely cut that tape and pull it out. That's looking pretty good and balanced. It'll take a little bit of time, but you can have a lot of fun with this. Now I've got a couple of different kinds of tape here, and while you're thinking about the tape, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click on that little bell to be alerted to future videos that come out. The design I'm doing here, I'm kind of winging as I go, and thinking in my mind, what do I want to do here? This tape that I'm using is really, really cool. Very easy to work with. It's more like a very thin masking tape, but it bends incredibly easy. It's got light adhesion, but it's got good adhesion. Again, just be careful that you don't cut into your paint. Now here's where you want to get rid of the excess tape that you don't want to have in the background of your work. Like I said, this video is a little bit on the longer side, but there's a lot of techniques and things that I'll be demonstrating that you really need to see. So like I said, if you fast forward through this, there may be some important steps that you miss. Alright, that should be just about ready to go. Now once you get the area taped off that you want, go ahead and mix up your candy colors that you're going to use. Now here I'm going to be using Tequila Yellow. This is from the nice folks at Createx. Now all the paints in this video that I'm using, all the airbrushes, the compressor, everything I'm using here, paint-wise, airbrush-wise, compressor-wise, I got from Spray Gunner. And I'll have some information on them here in just a little bit. Mix it up with your UV clear. Now this is going to hold it onto the base. Now the candy colors are not paint, okay? They are a dye. So you can't just spray the candy color because it won't stick. You've got to mix it with a base coat of some kind. And that's another tip from your Uncle Paulie. Here I'm using the Grex Tritium airbrush, and this one has a 0.5 needle in it. Put a little bit of your color in there once everything's all taped off, and then lightly apply your candy colors. Now the reason you lightly apply is because you've got your tape down. If you saturate your paint or your colors that you're putting on, it's going to bleed underneath the tape. Now the tape that I'm using is some really good quality tape, but you still don't want to test it, okay? So make sure that you put very light coats, let it dry, and then come back and put more coats on it if you need to. That's looking nice. I let that set for a while. Now I'm going to be using Candy 2O's Grabber Orange. And again, I'm going to be mixing this up with the UVLS Clear from Createx. Usually the mixture of this is about 50-50, but if you put just a little bit of the Candy 2O colors, you'll get a lighter spray when you go to put this on to your vehicle or whatever you're spraying. It looks shiny because the clear coat that I used here, the UVLS Clear, is gloss. You can get it in matte and you can get it in satin. Now here I've made a stencil. I cut out some small circles. I actually used the base of a pen and I drew them out. I cut out some small circles and I used, I think, some plastic from an old blister. I'm trying to show this to you and it keeps sliding around. I've got to put it at a good angle so you can see what I'm doing here. Sorry if my hands get in the way. Here I'm spraying the Grabber Orange and I'm only putting a light coat right in the creases of where the circles meet. I'll move the stencil down and I'll offset it. And I'll just keep doing that, going down the line, offsetting the stencil so it looks like it has scales. Let's go ahead and speed this up so you can see what's going on. Now the other thing to remember is the stencil that I'm using here is plastic. So the paint tends to build up, and if you happen to touch it to the background and it's still wet, then you're going to lose that. It's going to smear all over it. So you may have to wipe that off occasionally, so keep that in mind. I went around, I added a little bit of candy black to that orange, and I did a shadow around the outside of those designs. Now I've taped off my other area here, and I'm going to be using this handheld frisket to spray the blue that I'm going to be putting on there. Now what I did is I measured out 1 millimeter lines, and then I alternated them on the outside so I can get this angle. And this way here, you'll keep your lines equal on both sides of the car when you spray it. Just put an incredibly light coat on here. You're just trying to get those lines from the scallops that you're putting in here. Let's go ahead and speed this up also. Here I'm putting a dark line or a shadow around the outside of the design that I just put on, and I'm going to let that dry a little bit. Looking good. Once that was dry, I taped off the inside of the design, and then I sprayed it with that same grabber orange, but I also added a little bit more of the candy black to cover up the outside of the design. Here I'm pulling off the rest of the tape of the design, and the roof is practically done. Let's go ahead and speed this up. I'm very happy with the way this turned out. That looks really cool. That was fun. Let's go ahead and move on to the sides of the bus. Here I've got the top portion of the bus taped off, and I'm going to use some of the candy paint, and I'm putting little dots on there, and then I'm giving a burst of air to spread the paint around. Kind of just looks like a splat. It was kind of hard filming it and trying to get you to see what I was doing here, but you get the general effect. Now I'll put some purple on there, and then I'll flip it over and do the other side with the purple. And then I'll add some additional colors to it. I'll use red and orange and yellow and blue, and just give it a really heavy splash of color, but you'll see all these splats on the other side. And this is how it turned out. That's pretty cool. Now, like I said, all the paint that I used in this video, the airbrushes, the compressors, etc., were purchased at Spray Gunner. So check out spraygunner.com for all your airbrush needs. And the Createx paints that they have are absolutely incredible. They've got their own in-house brand called Chroma Air, and I actually use a little bit of the Chroma Air on this video also. That really adds a super burst of color on here. Now, I did get a little bit of overspray on that top bar on the bus, but I went back over it later with a chrome pen and cleaned it up. Now if you wipe it down with a little bit of the reducer, just be careful, because again, I used all the Createx paint, and you're liable to wipe off stuff that you sprayed on, so please be careful. That's looking really, really nice. And when you peel the tape, peel slow. Now you see there's a little bit on there, a little purple and stuff like that on the side. I just used a little bit of a damp paper towel with a reducer, and I wiped it right off, and it came off with no issues. Let's go ahead and speed this up. Here I got a little bit close with the reducer, and it started to take some of the background paint off the top of the roof. I just went ahead and taped it off again and sprayed a little bit more of the candy black in there to cover up the area that I just smeared around, and actually took some of the paint off. And it turned out fine. Let's go ahead and move on. Here's a couple of shots of the results so far. I'm having a ball doing this, just to show you guys the different techniques that I use on this. So far, so good. But again, it's up to your imagination. Now, just experiment with the airbrush, like spreading the paint around and doing some other things. This will definitely look really cool if you try this yourself. Now, the tape that I'm using here, I've got three different kinds here. I've got 1/8 inch, I've got 1/16, and 1/32 from the fine folks at Custom Fine Line Tapes, cftapes.com. They were kind enough to send me some samples of tape that I could use in this video. So check out the Custom Fine Line Tapes at cftapes.com. And now these tapes, like I said, they're like a masking tape, but they're very light tack, very easy to use, very easy to apply and bend and go around corners, etc. I've got a few more videos that I'm going to be doing here in the future demonstrating some other techniques, but these folks were really nice to send me some tapes to demonstrate in the video, and I think you should check them out too. They're a fantastic product, so please look them up. I've been looking forward to this next procedure that I'm going to be doing here for you. When you go to put your tape on and you're going to be taping off an area, make sure that it's symmetrical and that you want to make it even on both sides of the vehicle. So pick some points, like here I'm using the door crease, and where the wheel well starts to bend down into the wheel well, I'm using that as my guide. Now this tape is really cool. I can take that tape and put it on there and then use the bigger tape to mask off the area. But you want to use a low tack tape that's made specifically for painting, because if you don't and you go to take that tape off, it's going to peel your paint off if it hasn't dried significantly, and you don't want that to happen because you'll have to do it again. And if you have to do it again, you're going to wind up saying a bunch of curse words, and you definitely don't want to do that. Again, same thing, from the door crease down to where the wheel well starts to turn in the front. Get that pressed down, and then tape the rest of the area off. On the bottom portion of the vehicle, I sprayed a lace pattern. Now when I used the lace, I cut up enough to go around the entire vehicle, and I put a very light coat of this spray adhesive on there, but a very, very light coat. I taped off the rest of the vehicle that I didn't want to spray, and I sprayed this lace on there. I apologize, this portion of the video didn't turn out, so I couldn't use it, but this is how it turned out when it was done, and this was a lot of fun. Now I will go back in a little bit later in another video and do this lace again and show you how I did it. But so far so good, that's looking good. I also sprayed the front with some fluorescent colors from Chroma Air and faded from a yellow to an orange to a hot pink, and then covered that up also with a nice hard line separating the lace and the front end. Now this is the part that I'm really excited about. This is for the bottom portion of the vehicle. I measured out how much area I was going to need, and then I cut a rough pattern, or drew in a rough pattern with a pen, and then went in and cut it out with a razor. Let's go ahead and speed this up a little bit. Now that I've got these cut out, I'm going to peel it up and apply it to the side of the vehicle. Once I get it on the side, then I go ahead and smooth it down and touch it to the base. You need to make sure that this has been thoroughly dried before you start applying this on there, because when you pull that tape off, it'll peel the design right up with it. Now do the same thing to the other side. Now if you're worried about both sides being the same exact design, then you're going to have to mirror it when you go to cut out the other pattern. This is not exactly the same on both sides, but it's got the same principles to it. Now get the rest of the vehicle taped off so you don't get any overspray on the rest of your vehicle. Like so. Now I'm going to use this Chroma Air Gray. Now the Chroma Air paints are airbrush ready. You can thin them down if you have to, especially if you have an airbrush with a 0.3 needle, but it usually works extremely well, so check it out. This was after the first coat of the Chroma Air Gray. You can go back in and put several coats to cover up the design that you have underneath. Let's move on. We gave it several more coats. Now I've got some Createx Wicked Black. I'm pointing the airbrush at a clothespin, and as the paint builds up on the clothespin, it's going to start blowing dots of paint onto the gray that I sprayed. What we're trying to accomplish here is we're trying to make the background look like stone or granite. Build the paint up and the airbrush will blow the droplets onto that gray area that you just sprayed. Pretty cool effect, huh? Now the bigger dots may have some excess paint in there, so you may have to touch them with a Q-tip or something to get some of the excess paint out there. So what I'm saying with that is if you go to clear coat over it later on, you're liable to have bumps in your clear coat because the paint underneath just left a big drop on there. We'll flip it around and do the other side. But that's looking pretty cool. Now I'm going to go around with the same black and I'm going to highlight and go around the edge of the cut that I made with the tape. This is going to give it a shadow effect. Try not to get too heavy. Most of the spray I'm doing there is on the tape on the top. Now that I've done that, and you can see that shadow effect I was telling you, I'm going to go in with some white, or some black here first, I'm sorry, and I'm going to put some cracks on there. When that dries, I'm going to go back in with the white, and I'm going to use my light source to go in and highlight the cracks to make it look like the sunlight is shining on the edges of the cracks that are on the vehicle. And I apologize for my hands being in the way, but you'll see the result here as I paint it on. Let's go ahead and speed this up. That's looking really, really good. I'm very happy with the way that turned out. Now, I did the same thing around the big dots on there as I put a little bit of a highlight on there, and that just makes it look like cracked concrete or granite or whatever it is you want to call it. But this was a lot of fun. I learned this technique from Terry Hill when we did some airbrush getaways together. God rest his soul. Here's what we started with, this Hot Wheels drag bus at 1/18 scale. Now, of course, the bigger scale cars are a little bit easier to paint on like this, but you can experiment and do this with your 1/64 scale cars also. So take your time, have some fun. The worst that happens is you don't like the result and you do it again. Here's the final result. I tried a bunch of different airbrush techniques here. I did the lace spray pattern, and again, that will come up in another video in the near future. I did the granite concrete down below. I did the splash spray technique, as I like to call it. I did the scallop technique on the top, and I did the little flute edges on the top in the blue. And I put it all back together. Well, I clear coated it first with several coats of clear, and then I put it all back together. And this is the end result. If you have any questions, contact me in the comments and I'll do my best to answer all your questions. This is a lot of fun, and I will have this drag bus up at the grand opening of the House of Cars Carolina in Lexington, North Carolina. So if you happen to make it up there on March 19th, I'll look forward to seeing you then. What a lot of fun, and I'm happy to give this to them. Check out the folks at spraygunner.com. They've got a complete line of airbrushes for all your airbrush needs. They've got a really cool line of compressors to include their wonderful no-name compressors. They've got airbrush paints from Createx, which is an incredibly great brand. They've got their in-house brand called Chroma Air. I love these paints. Airbrush kits from Grex and No Name and many other manufacturers. Spend less, get more at spraygunner.com. Here's another glamour shot of the vehicle. Now I'll have some more of these techniques and I will show them individually so you'll be able to reference them. But thank you for joining me today. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to showing you some of these techniques. Now there's a whole bunch of other ones I'm going to show in the near future, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and click on that little bell. Thanks again for the folks at CF Tapes for sending that great product, and of course, Spray Gunner. I love their products. They're great people. Check them out, please. Thank you, and cheers.